Welcome back to the White Coat Club. This is Lindsey and Nicole, and we are both counselors at MinPrep. Today, we're going to be discussing part 2 of preparing for the 2025 admission cycle. And we're going to be specifically talking about what to know, like the where, when, and how many. Don't forget to like and subscribe to get more BSMD and med school admissions advice. All right, Nicole, kick us off. Tell us a little bit about where students can apply to.
Yeah, so I feel like a lot of students worry about the where, as in which schools they're applying to, but not necessarily the where, as in which application platform. Um, there are multiple application platforms that you can use to complete and submit applications. You may have heard of some of them. The Common App is probably the most popular. Then we have the Coalition or SCORE, SCORE bought out Coalition. You may have a SCORE account at your school already for like the preparation side of things. And then there's a lot of state-specific applications, such as the SUNY app for the state of New York universities, the UC apps for California. There's Apply Texas. And then a lot of schools themselves have their own individual internal application. So when you're looking at your list of schools, it's really important to kind of strategize which application you're going to use for which school.
Yeah, that's like the most important part because not all schools participate with all like the application platforms. Like I believe it's Boston University. You can only apply to Boston University on the Common App for our PI's BSMD program, even though they accept, I believe they accept like the coalition slash score as well as the Common App. But if you're applying to their BSMD program, you have to apply on the Common App. So looking at
Mhm.
like the specific rules is really important, and mapping it out before you start applying is super key because once you applied, even if you get rejected, you can't delete it. Like though that counts as like towards your 20 schools on the Common App. So kind of preparing that ahead of time so that you're not in a pickle where the schools at the end of your list don't have a place to go because they only took the Common App.
Yeah,
Um,
you made a really good point. So the Common App only accepts 20 schools. So you can only apply to 20 schools on the Common App. Now, you similar to the FAFSA, like you can put them on and then you can take them off and do more. The Common App, you cannot do that. Once you've done 20, that is it. So if you're applying to more than 20, which is what a lot of our students are currently doing, that's kind of the trend. You really have to figure out exactly which ones you want to do. And I will probably get into this too, but I usually will say only apply to about 17 or 18
mhm.
on the Common App. And we can kind of talk about some situations that we've had students in the past where they do want to apply to schools last minute, but it might be one of those schools that only accept Common App.
I do the same thing just in case. You might find out
Yeah.
like your new dream school in January and you're like, oh man, now I can't apply to it because they only took that. So if you can, I think it's a
Yeah.
good
I mean,
idea.
if we're talking about this in June, right, which is like right now in June, a lot of our students already have their list figured out. Or end of July. They're definitely have figured this out before they go back to school and figure out which platforms they're using for those early apps. So much happens for you in 6 months when you're in that stage. So just like Lindsay said, your dream school or the school that you might want to now go to for whatever reason might not be available to you. And that did happen to me a couple of years ago where a student used all of their spots on Common App for schools that they didn't have to use Common App for. They could have used other apps for some of those schools. And then they really decided like this was their dream. NYU was their dream school. They had to go there. They had to apply, and they couldn't because there's no other platform for them to apply through. So that was pretty devastating and definitely stressful. So I always say save a spot or two at least.
And I try and reduce the amount of like school specific, like, Penn State. I believe it's Penn State, and they'll have like, school specific ones. You apply on like their website. University of Illinois has that as well. Siena does that too. And a lot of other schools will have like a school specific application. And so I try and reduce the amount of those that we use just so that kids don't have to put in all the like demographic information and all that type of stuff
Mhm.
over and over again. So I'll try and use like the major platforms as much as possible. But it's not always possible. Sometimes I think it's like Siena, I believe like if you apply on like their website, sometimes you can get like a free waiver or things like that if you do it on their website versus the Common App. So that might be part of your strategy as well.
Yeah, and then hitting up like and figuring out which schools have free app weeks. So like North Carolina, there's a week in the fall that all the North Carolina schools are free to apply if you apply within that week. So, but like you would have to use their application. So like figuring stuff out like that and like really being strategic of when you're going to apply to certain places too and which apps are going to be important. Like
That's a,
even if you don't, if you're applying to Chapel Hill, like even if you're not going to do, ED, you just want to apply that week just so that way it's free.
yeah, can't complain with that.
It adds up,
It
definitely.
does. Yeah. And some of the, especially BSMD, I think it's like Drexel, you pay for like your initial application, which probably is like, I don't know, between 50 and $80. And then you had to pay like an additional like $100 for like the med school BSMD application side of things too. So
Hmm.
sometimes they really do add up quick. So anytime you can use a waiver, go for it. Now, one thing to note too is like the schools don't have a preference. Applying on their school website versus the Common App versus like Score/Coalition, no preference whatsoever. So whatever one kind of makes sense for you, do that because unless they like explicitly state like for RPI that you have to do the Common App for their BSMD program, you can use any platform that you want.
Yeah, there's no preference there. I know last year we had some confusion with the SUNY app and some of the BSMD programs.
Mm,
So just make sure like the wording is the same and might be a little bit hard to find the specific application you're applying to via some of those state application platforms, but
mhm.
it is possible. It just might take a little bit more digging.
Digging into it, clicking the
Yeah.
right buttons.
Yes. Yeah. Like a lot of times, students will be on even the Common App and say, I don't see the supplemental application. I don't see the supplemental questions. If you don't check the exact boxes in terms of major, in terms of start date or start term, it may not appear. And
Yep.
um, I know some schools too, if you select that you want to apply to the Honors College, you're not eligible. Like I think that's a Penn State issue. If you click, you're going to apply to the Honors College, the BSMD supplemental never appears. But then if you unclick it, you do have that option. So definitely do your homework there in terms of when you're on the applications themselves.
It's a great point. I've had many kids question it. They just didn't fill out the information. So yeah, fill out your Common App information after August 1st. You'll be able to see kind of all those updated essays. Because that's kind of the when of everything
Yeah.
too. So a lot of our application platforms open up in August. UC, SUNY, Common App, Coalition/Score. Actually, Coalition/Score, those will open up in July or August. Like no one specific date because it depends on the individual school, but all the rest of them, August 1st is kind of your main date when a lot of your applications will you can start to submit the essays for like the traditional schools, traditional like undergrad schools, those will all be updated. BSMD programs are always sometimes a little bit slow. Sometimes they'll also be updated August 1st. Sometimes they won't. It just kind of depends. So having everything else done kind of can help just to make sure that you don't have like any last minute surprises or a lot of work if BSMD programs do change their essays. But yeah, so August 1st is kind of your big day that you'll have all those types of things.
Yeah. And if you want to start even sooner than that, you can. You can create a Common App account prior to August 1st. It's just
Hmm.
not going to be open for your grade year, like your grad year. So, like, if you're doing it in July and you're graduating in 2025, it's still going to be open for the students that have graduated in 2024 applications. You can create
Hmm.
one of those accounts, and then anytime you sign back in after August 1st, you'd click the button to roll it over into the next cycle. So you always could start a little bit earlier, but you don't have
Hmm.
to. August 1st is when your official cycle will begin.
Yeah, because you could start to fill like kind of like that demographic information, like your parents and like your classes and your tests and things like that. That like third tab, I think it's called like the Common App tab, that
Mhm.
will stay consistent, but like the school specific questions, I think that those 100% get wiped out. So
Yes.
you can do some stuff, just not everything. And I think it is a good idea if you have time before August 1st to do it.
Yeah. Definitely for like the family demographic stuff. I mean, especially for students who go back to school in August. So if we're
Hmm.
talking, Georgia, Alabama, North Carolina, you're starting school early August, I would start maybe getting some of that done in July if possible. But like if you're a New Yorker, New Jersey, you don't start school till after Labor Day, you have the time. So
Yeah, you got a lot more time, lot more summer.
yeah. Well, a lot more summer left after that. Yeah.
That's true. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's always nice. And one other thing to do after August 1st too is just to make sure that the application options have remained the same. Sometimes schools will change things. Maybe now they no longer offer ED2. Maybe they've started to offer like early decision two or, have changed their early action deadline. Or a lot of times I think the January deadlines will change because sometimes schools will change it based on like if it's on a weekend or not. So it is
Mhm.
like a good idea just to reevaluate the deadlines and to also just like really firm up your application strategy about which schools you're doing early action or early decision, which ones are regular decision or early decision two or restrictive early action. So just figuring out your plan so that you can manage your time properly too is really key.
Yeah, definitely figuring out the deadlines because you could assume, Penn State's gone back and forth with their BSMD the last couple of years. You could assume it's the same, but it's not a guarantee that it's going to be the same. And a lot of schools,
Mhm.
exactly like you said, with the January dates, based on like the day that the new year falls on, it might be a weekend or they might push it to Monday. So definitely like triple check those after the first.
All right, let's move on to how many. Um, and so for this, we're really talking a lot about like how many schools you'd want to apply to. And the big thing to remember, of course, is that every list is going to be really specific to each student. And there's a lot of different factors that you should really be considering too. So over the summer, hopefully you have already been considering like what kind of schools you like, maybe doing some visits. If you haven't, now is the perfect time to get started. No matter when you're listening to this podcast, now is like a great time to start working on your college list. And so you might want to think about things like, do you want to stay in state? Are you interested in BSMD or like top schools? Is there a particular major that you're looking for or like, the diversity of the school, different opportunities that are available. There's like so many different things that are going to be so student specific, like the class size, how like what kind of options are available. It doesn't really matter what, because it's going to be what is best for like your learning style and like what kind of things are going to help you on your next steps. But take that time now to really think about that and not a week before applications are due.
Absolutely.
Is there anything like BSMD students should think about for their college list?
Oh yeah. I mean, you kind of talked about the things that are specific to you. I mean, there's so many BSMD programs out there, but again, are we looking for somewhere local? Are you not really, area sensitive? Are you tuition sensitive? A lot of these schools are private universities, so they do have higher tuitions. Even if you're not in state specifically, the out of state tuition is typically lower than a private. If you're sensitive to like the major that you have to do, or if you have the flexibility for a different major in the BSMD program, there's a couple of things that you would definitely want to put into consideration when you're trying to narrow them down in terms of like non-stats specific.
Mhm. Yeah, and so I mean, generally our students are applying to a lot of BSMD programs. I would say like the general guidelines we usually give are like 10 to 15, but I don't know about you, Nicole, but it feels like a lot of my students are doing more colleges than normal, regardless of what I tell them to do.
Yeah,
Have you noticed that as well?
I have. Yeah, but 10 to 15 is usually like what I'd recommend also.
Mhm. Yeah, and we
I think it
definitely,
gets into like a quality over quantity thing
yeah.
that we know we've discussed before. And then it also gets into, you know, the acceptance rates for BSMD are just so low. They're
Mhm.
so competitive. So, you know, do you want to just target ones that you can really give a great application for and then target some backup schools that are going to also give you great options? It's just
Mhm.
going to be harder to do more than more than like 10 to 15 for each category.
Yeah. And it depends, of course, on like how early you start and how like motivated you are. But yeah, that's definitely kind of the averages that we see. If your list is bigger than that, one thing that I've been telling my students is to make like a list of your priorities. Like, these five are my top priority. I want to like make 100% positive that I get these done and then, so on and so forth and kind of have like a list of priorities. So if your list We have had kids who've got bigger lists where it's like 20 to 30 BSMD. And so potentially just like mapping out, okay, here is what I for sure want to get to. Here's what I want to get to if we have time. And exactly
Mm,
like Nicole said, like without reducing like the quality of work. So trying to maintain that. And if you do end up applying to more, just being strategic about how you're spending your time. It can be done. I think we've had some kids apply to like, I've had one girl, she did a ton. I think it was like 30 to 35. And she worked consistently every single day on it over the summer throughout her school year. Like she was a really consistent worker. And I think that that would be like the only way you could really get it all done.
yeah. And then like, if it's UCs or something where you're already sending the same statements everywhere
Mhm.
anyway, like you could probably squeeze in a few more. But like
Yes.
things like that, like there definitely are some ways to be able to submit more with the same quality. But again, just kind of being more intentional.
Mhm. And then for traditional schools, we usually say like, 2 to 3 safeties, maybe like 3 matches, and then like 3 to 4 reaches. But
Hmm.
that's, I've noticed really where the list balloons is with the reaches, because if you have, Rice and a couple Ivies and Stanford and Duke and NYU and Boston, like, all of a sudden UNC Chapel Hill, if you're out of state, all of a sudden your list's filled with a lot of like 10% or less type schools, and it gets tricky. So, you don't want to, you want to make sure you have that balance. So you're not only applying to reaches or, I mean, of course, you could apply to as many safety and matches as you want, as long as you're like genuinely interested in them. But, just making sure that you're not applying just to apply, that you actually would want to go to that university. Anything else that people think need to know about applying?
I don't think so. I mean, know the deadlines, know the timeline, set yourself a timeline that makes sense for
Mhm.
you, and then
And
stick to it.
a flexible timeline too, I would say. You know, don't do one like maybe like have a slight plan that mapped out like far in advance, but like reevaluate every week because I have had kids move ahead or are slower and realize that like they can't keep up with everything. So kind of evaluating that timeline on a frequent basis, I think is always a good idea.
Yeah. And then the other thing I usually tell my students too is like carve time out in your schedule each week
Yeah.
to give
Yeah.
yourself check-ins. Like checking in with where am I at with my goals? Set yourself long-term and short-term goals in terms
Yep.
of your, to-do list.
Yeah. And honestly, carve out time every day for your essays too. It's kind of like
Yeah.
SAT, ACT prep. It's like, if you only are doing it on Saturdays and Sundays, like what happens if like you have a lot of homework on a Saturday or you like have a family event on Saturday and now half your time is gone. So instead of
Mhm.
doing like 4 hours on Saturday and 4 hours on Sunday, do like an hour and a half or an hour even like every day. And so if you miss one day, it's not as detrimental to your like essay writing plan, but every day and like drafting and revising and looking back at things is really key, I think, to success.
Yeah, I
But
agree.
easier said than done. It does take effort.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
holding yourself accountable is really key. Maybe having someone like a moon prep counselor to keep you on track too. Just making sure that you do stay organized is I think the best way to do this.
Yeah. Staying organized is key.
It's a lot, but it is doable with some hard work. All right, well, I think that's it for us today. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of White Coat Club. Check back with us in 2 weeks for some more great content about BSMD and college admissions. But until then, we'll see you next time.